Saberes program was launched by us in 2022, and we aim at strengthening and sharing practices, experiences, reflections, and social technologies to improve community philanthropy and social environmental justice in Brazil. We do production of knowledge so that we can build and imagine new futures. In the first set of people in our team, 7 people joined, and Cássio Inglês de Souza, he conducted an evaluation on social environmental micro projects as a mechanism to philanthropy based on the experience of ISPN. There was also Marceli Decote. She studied the work from what we can do to democratize philanthropy from favelas and peripheral areas in Brazil. We also had Mariana Assis as a member to strengthen community and grassroots organizations in Florianopolis. There was also Jesse Ippolito. She conducted studies on the narrative of Black women about the impact of philanthropy in the Northeast and North of Brazil. There was also Ronaldo L. Jr. He did work on community action, and also Kleber Rodrigues, who did work on regenerative funds, especially in Brumadinho and other parts of Brazil. If you want to learn more about that research, I can share the link with you in the chat. Last year, we had an event with the first cohort, and you can learn about their work by watching this YouTube video. And today, we are here with the second cohort. They are finishing their work this year in 2024. They're a team of 9 people who are doing amazing work in Brazil. I'll briefly introduce the group before we start our conversation. Albert França da Costa, he's doing research on barriers for social movements to have access to funds. Anderson Menezes is doing work at Tijolo por Tijolo, which is brick by brick, and it's a community doing social work to increase social local journalism. Also, Carolina Farias doing a podcast, and also social investment, which is some research doing by Daiane, focused on sports in the Northeast of Brazil. There's also Emily Mel doing research on transphobia, environmental transphobia, and climate justice for transgender people. Luana focusing on gender, race, and economic rights. There's also Maria Clara Araújo de Passos, and her research is Cadê o Aqué? Where's the money? And she's doing work focusing on Brazilian travestis and transsexual women in Brazil and philanthropy. There's also Maiana Ellen Nunes da Silva doing work Axé for people who are Axé, which is philanthropy targeted at devotees of African Brazilian religions. And there's also Redilon de Matos doing work on peripheral youth and providing resources for peripheral youth. And today, all of those wonderful people, they're having a conversation with us. So they're going to talk about their research, their findings, their challenges, and what they believe we should do in philanthropy. While they introduce their research, feel free to, I'll be sharing links with you in the chat. And I invite all of you who are watching us, if you have any questions, you can ask the questions in the chat. And we are also going to use the Q&A box. Feel free to ask us questions. interact with
essa
us as
roda,
much
eu vou
as you
chamar a
need.
rua,
And for us to get
conforme eu falei aqui na
started,
abertura, né, o programa esse ano
I'll
nasceu para apoiar a
invite
produção de conhecimento por
one
parte de
person to
lideranças
join us.
comunitárias minorizadas
We
em
first
Portugal.
started
E a
to
Lua,
do
acho
Projeto
que foi ela que
Saberes
mais
to
veio aqui
provide
falar assim
support for
mais de
people.
perto.
And
E eu vou passar
Lua
a roda então,
joined us
pedindo para a
to
Lua
do
o que essas
research.
leis
And
têm
I
nos
would
dado
like to
para a philanthropia
start with
brasileira.
Lua. She's going to talk
Oi,
about
pessoal,
her
eu sou a
perspectives.
Lua, eu sou uma mulher
Hi
negra,
guys, I'm
com
Lua. I'm a
cabelo
black woman.
cacheado na altura dos
I have
ombros,
curly hair.
usando batom vermelho.
I'm wearing
Tenho
red
mais ou
lipstick.
menos 1,5 m de altura, sou uma mulher
I'm
negra,
not
ruiva,
very
de
tall.
blusa verde água. Bom,
I'm a
a
fat
minha
woman
pesquisa
and I'm
no programa
wearing
Saberes é
a
sobre justiça
green
social e
shirt.
filantropia,
My
né? Como
research is
gênero,
about
raça
social justice and
e
philanthropy
direitos econômicos
and
são
how
importantes
gender,
em serem
race,
discutidos dentro
and
do
economic
ecossistema
rights are
para a
important
gente
to be
produzir uma
discussed
filantropia
within the
capaz
philanthropy
de
system
produzir justiça social.
because we actually
E
want to
pensando
cater
nesse
to
dentro
social
do programa
justice.
Saberes, é
And
falar sobre a
considering my
valorização dos
research
saberes
in
locais.
the Programa
Eu que venho de
Saberes, I
território,
focused
né,
on
sob
traditional
uma ótica de
knowledge.
equidade de gênero e raça dentro
And
da
I've been
filantropia.
really
Isso é
focusing on
fundamental
gender and
porque
care
esses
within the
territórios,
philanthropy
essas
system.
comunidades, elas carregam o
Those territories
conhecimento
and
e as
communities, the
vivências
traditional ones, they
dos seus próprios
carry
viventes.
knowledge,
E
their
nada
own
melhor do que
knowledge.
elas mesmas para conhecer
And
suas
those
necessidades,
very
desafios
communities
e
know their
tendências.
challenges, don't know
Ao
their
incorporar esses
needs, and know
saberes,
how powerful they are.
permite que a
So
filantropia
when
se
we
torne mais
incorporate
eficaz,
their knowledge,
inclusiva
philanthropy
e
becomes more
responsável com as
efficient
realidades
and
locais,
as more considerate
evitando
to
soluções
local realities
padronizadas
as
ou
well. So then
colonialistas,
we
que podem ser
avoid
muitas vezes
having
desconectadas dos
standardized
contextos
solutions
culturais,
that could be forced
sociais
upon
e
the
específicos
territories.
desses próprios territórios.
Therefore, we need to take into
Quando a
account
gente
those
valoriza melhor o
territories'
conhecimento local,
characteristics. When
isso nos
we
oferece
treasure
compreensão
and take into
profunda
account
das
local
dinâmicas
knowledge,
sociais,
we have a
econômicas e
deep
culturais
meaning and
que aquela comunidade
understanding of
pertence.
that
Isso
territory
permite
and
que as
the
iniciativas
territory's
filantrópicas
needs.
sejam mais
Therefore,
adaptadas às realidades da
philanthropy
comunidade.
solutions
E
can
quando
be
ela faz
adapted to
isso,
the
ela fica
reality of certain
valorizando os saberes
communities.
locais. As
And by
próprias
appreciating
comunidades se
local
tornam
knowledge, the
co-protagonistas
communities
na construção
themselves,
de
they play the
soluções,
lead role
que
when
é
building
criança,
solutions.
né? Protagonistas dos seus próprios
And this is
saberes.
the very reality. They
Isso
are
gera autonomia,
the lead
ao
roles
invés de
of their own lives
dependência
and
de
their own
intervenções
communities.
externas.
And it's
Fora
important
que
because it
iniciativas que
fosters
integram os saberes
autonomy.
locais tendem a ser sempre mais
Also,
sustentáveis também, né?
initiatives
Já que as
that don't
soluções são
respect
construídas a
local
partir
knowledge,
das
those
práticas e
initiatives
recursos
don't
que
thrive.
fazem parte do cotidiano da própria
Basically, we need to
comunidade.
take into
E
account
quando agimos
what the
desta forma, a
community
filantropia
itself does.
reconhece e é capaz
When
de
philanthropy
corrigir
takes into account
desigualdades
that
históricas
knowledge,
que muitas
philanthropy
vezes são
actually can
causadas por
correct historical
marginalização de conhecimentos
inequalities
não hegemônicos, né, da própria
because
filantropia
we know that
modernista,
philanthropy oftentimes marginalized
protagonizada pela
not
juventude. E
mainstream
aí, quando nós
knowledge,
olhamos para
let's
territórios de
say,
populações
knowledge that would be
indígenas,
validated by
quilombolas,
whiteness. When we
periféricas,
consider
comunidades
indigenous communities,
tribais,
quilombola
de
communities,
comunidades dedicadas de
um,
axé, a gente
communities
percebe
of
a partir
devotees
dessa
of
compreensão
African,
sempre
Brazilian
produzir uma filantropia
religions,
capaz de
when
produzir
we
transformação
can
social.
take
E isso
their
sim a
ideas
gente
into
chama de
account, we can
inovação,
actually
né?
deliver social
Inovação na
transformation.
filantropia nesse
That's
contexto de uma filantropia
innovation within the
racializada, por
philanthropy
exemplo.
system.
Esse aspecto ainda mais relevante, já que essas populações negras,
We need to
indígenas,
bear
de
in
axé,
mind that
LGBTQIAPN+,
indigenous
movimentos sociais,
black
têm sido
populations and
historicamente
other
excluídos dos
marginalized
processos
groups, they have
decisórios.
been
Então, incorporar
excluded
esses
from the
saberes
decision
é o
making
caminho para
process.
reparar essas
Therefore,
injustiças
incorporating
e
their
promover um
knowledge is the way
desenvolvimento
forward to
representativo. E aí,
foster
quando eu olho para
equitable
isso
development.
a partir de uma lente
When
de
we consider
equidade
the
de
lenses
gênero
of
e de
equity,
raça,
gender equity,
a
and
gente
race
pode
equity,
trazer muitas evidências para esse campo
we
filantrópico
can
que pode
actually
redirecionar a nossa ação
see that
para
the
uma filantropia
philanthropy
cada
can
vez mais
change
eficaz e
action
capaz de
so
produzir
that
mais
philanthropy
justiça
can
social.
be
E como
increasingly more
pesquisadora da
efficient
rede
to
do programa
deliver social
Saberes, eu
justice.
pude ter essa
And as a
perspectiva sobre
researcher in
entender
the
como
Programa
na produção
Saberes,
de oficinas
I have
você
managed
desenvolver
to
esses
conduct some
territórios, que
workshops,
são territórios
workshops in
periferizados, de trabalhadores
certain
rurais
territories.
e também em territórios de periferias
And
urbanas,
those
em
territories
em
in
comunidades
the
quilombolas,
outskirts
tanto
and
na
also
Bahia
in
quanto em São
Quilombola
Paulo, quanto no Rio de
communities
Janeiro.
in São Paulo,
E
Rio de
aí eu pude
Janeiro, and
perceber
Bahia.
que nessas
And by doing
organizações e nessas
those
oficinas que eu
workshops
pude
and
promover,
visiting
elas refletiam
organizations,
muito também acerca de uma
people
pesquisa
would
que eu tenho
show me
desenvolvido dentro
the
do fundo de
fact
base,
that it connects
que é
with
uma
the
pesquisa
research
chamada
I've
de
conducted at
filantropia em massa.
Fundo
Então,
Aguibara,
quando eu cheguei
which is a
nesses
fund
territórios,
devoted
a
to
maioria das
race
pessoas
and
inscritas para fazer oficinas
economy.
sobre captação de
Most
recurso
people who
eram
would
mulheres.
enroll
E aí,
for the
ao abrir as
workshops
inscrições e
to
perceber
learn how
que,
to
inclusive, em alguns
get
territórios eu
funds,
precisei fazer oficina
there
durante
were
2 dias,
women.
porque foram mais de
And
30 pessoas
sometimes I would
inscritas, e
conduct
aí eu dividi
workshops for
elas em
two
grupos de
days, and
5
of
pessoas,
over 30 people
e aí
would
eu dividi
enroll.
em duas
And then I
turmas em
would
grupos para poder fazer
organize two
essas oficinas
groups,
em
one
grupo,
group on a
de
day,
captação de
30 people, and
recursos. Eu
another
queria
30
como
people
que
on
essas
another day.
organizações
They wanted
se
to learn
estabeleciam e como que elas
how they
teriam os
could
recursos de
do efficient
financiamento
work
para
to get
suas realidades
funds
locais e
so that
potencializar
they would
cada
get
vez mais
funds and
aquilo que
change
elas já
their
conheciam,
own
sem ter que inventar
local
uma nova
reality.
roda ou sem ter que entrar especificamente dentro de um
Basically,
contexto
they
próprio
wanted
de um edital
to
específico. E foi uma
not
experiência muito
to apply for a
interessante,
specific
porque
call
além
of
de eu poder
action.
conhecer melhor esses
It
territórios,
was a
eu
very
tive a
good experience
oportunidade
for
de,
me
no meu
because
projeto
not
lá de
only
Saberes,
did I
conhecer melhores
learn
também. E
about
para
those territories
alguns
and their
projetos e algumas
needs,
comunidades,
but
foi uma
also
primeira vez
I
deles terem se
managed
captado
to
e um desses
see
projetos
that
me
for
marcou
certain
muito, porque é um
territories, it
projeto
was
que
the
tem
first
40
time that they
anos de
managed to
história
get
e foi a
resources
primeira vez que ele teve acesso a recursos
from
por conta
outside.
dessa
Some
oficina
projects
que
they've
pôde
been
ser
running for
executada
40
a
years and
partir
they've
de
only
comunidades
managed
no
to get
Saberes, no
resources
projeto Comuá. Então, eu queria
this
aproveitar e trazer
time
aqui
when they got
justamente
support
essa
from the
oportunidade
Saberes
e mostrar
program.
como que os
It was
recursos
very
poderiam ser
powerful
relevantes das comunidades
because
negras
when
e de
they
pessoas negras,
do get
esse dinheiro circula e atinge cada
the
vez mais
money
pessoas, né? Eles
circulates
agem
within the
coletivamente.
community
E não foi
because they
diferente
do
também com a
collective
minha
work.
pesquisa. E aí eu pude perceber que essas
And
organizações
with
dentro
my
desses
research,
territórios,
I
elas se
realized that
organizam
organizations
e
within
muitas
those
vezes elas conseguem
territories,
captar
those
captam as de
organizations, they
250 mil
organize
pessoas dentro dos seus
themselves in a way
territórios.
that they sometimes
E
affect 200,000
provavelmente
people.
quase 60% dessas
And
iniciativas
usually
são
60%
financiadas
of
com
those
recursos do
initiatives
próprio
are
bolso. E
funded
esse
by
percentual de
their own
captação
resources.
corresponde a
So,
menos
this
de 5
concept
mil
of
reais por ano. E
getting
dentro desses
money from
60%,
funders,
quase
it
metade,
accounts for less than $1,000 per
500
year.
reais. Vocês
And
sabiam que
most
84%
funds
das
they
pessoas que
got,
estão na linha de frente
it's
das
between
organizações negras
500.
são
Have
mulheres?
you
E
do you
dessas mulheres,
Are you
84%
aware that
delas são
most people
mães e
working in
apenas
grassroots movements and
18%
organizations are
conseguem obter
women?
algum tipo de remuneração
Only
por seu trabalho nos
18%
projetos,
of those
enquanto
women
os
get paid for the work
82%
they
atuam
do.
de forma voluntária
And
e ainda
82%
trabalham
of
só
them
para poder
do volunteer
financiar o
work
processo
in
de
those
democratização de
projects,
direitos nos seus
and they even
territórios.
have a
Se esse
job,
terceiro
a regular
segmento
job,
gera
so that they
quase
can
6
support
milhões de
themselves.
emprego, quem que está
And
empregando e remunerando?
considering that the
Por que as mulheres
philanthropy
negras,
sector
em sua
employs
quase
6 million
totalidade,
people,
ocupam
let's say,
cargos
but
voluntários
why
e
do
enfrentam
Black
jornadas
women are
árduas
doing
e
volunteer
múltiplas de
work
trabalho?
within
Elas cuidam da
this
casa,
ecosystem?
dos filhos,
They
do
take care
trabalho
of their
fora, dos
houses, they raise
projetos
their
e ainda da
children, they
manutenção da
have jobs,
democracia
and they
garantida dos
even
direitos de
do
suas
work
comunidades.
in the
Quem cuida do
grassroots
território?
movements.
Quem
Who are the
financia a
people who take
manutenção da
care of
democracia?
the people who provide care?
Né?
Who are
Então,
the
diante
people who
desse cenário,
finance
é possível alcançar
democracy?
algum tipo de
So,
justiça
considering this
social
scenario,
sem uma
can we
harmonia de
reach
especificidades de
social
raça e de
justice
gênero?
without race and gender
Só é
equity?
possível justiça social com recurso
Social
alocado direto na
justice
base
will
e com
only be
equidade.
be
E a gente vive um
implemented
pouco
with
sobre isso
equity
durante
and
esse semestre.
resources
E aí,
available
eu
for
queria
the
chamar um pouco a
grassroots
Maio para
movements.
fazer essa conversa junto comigo,
Now I would like to have Mayo
porque
join me.
a minha pesquisa se conecta muito com a
My
pesquisa do Maio.
research is really
Então, eu quero
connected
chamar ela para
to
essa conversa para entender qual a
Maya's
importância
research.
política
So
da
I'd like
visão de
to
Saberes
hear
e
her.
o que é que
What's
tem
the
a
political
ensinar a
importance
filantropia
of
brasileira?
candomblé temples and what can they
Obrigada
teach to
pela
the Brazilian
pergunta, Lua.
philanthropy?
Bom,
Thank you
sou
so much
Maiana,
for the
sou uma mulher
question,
negra,
Lua.
tenho
My
cabelo
name is
crespo,
Mayana. I'm a
curto,
black woman.
uso
I
uma cor
have
rosa e também estou usando
black
uma blusa
black
azul.
hair, short hair. I'm
Bom,
wearing pink
Lua, primeiro eu quero
lipstick
começar
and I'm
respondendo
wearing
a
a blue
pergunta pensando
shirt.
o que que são as
I would like to
religiões de
answer to
matriz
your
africana. Você
question. And
falou
the
uma coisa
first
muito
thing is,
importante,
what
que as
are
comunidades
African
locais,
Brazilian
elas têm saberes a
religions?
serem compartilhados, né?
Local
E aí eu vou
communities
citar
have
uma
knowledge
fala
that
da
they can
Lúcia
share.
Xavier,
And
que
I'm
diz
going
da
to
histórica do
quote
movimento negro
Lucia
de mulheres,
Xavier.
certamente vocês a conhecem,
She's a
e
Brazilian
no prefácio
activist,
do
and
livro
probably you know
Direitos
her.
dos Povos de
And
Terra,
in
que
the
é um livro que eu tenho
preface
usado
of
muito na
the
minha
book, The
pesquisa, na
Rights
bibliografia que eu tenho
of
usado muito,
African
ela
Brazilian
diz que as religiões de matriz
People,
africana são uma
devotees of
síntese de
those
diferentes
religions,
culturas,
the
concepções
African
e
Brazilian
religiosidades de
religions,
povos
they
africanos que chegaram
connect
Ao
to
Brasil na condição de
African
escravizados. E essas
realities
religiões foram
by people
fundamentais
who
nos
were
arranjos
enslaved in
econômicos,
Brazil. And
sociais
those
e
religions are
políticos e na
key
reconstrução das
for
origens,
people
histórias
to
e
rebuild
ancestralidades, restaurando a condição de
ancestry
humanidade
in
perdida com a
Brazil
escravidão.
and
Ou seja, com esse trecho que a Lúcia está
recreate
dizendo, é que
humanity
as
in
religiões de matriz
spite of
africana elas
enslavement
são
in Brazil.
espaços políticos que têm sua
Basically,
origem,
African
mas
Brazilian religions
historicamente
are
esse legado não
political
tem sido
spaces
reconhecido.
ever
Então, na
since,
minha
but
pesquisa,
people
Axé
don't
para a Vida
acknowledge
do Axé,
that.
o
So,
papel da
my
filantropia
research,
para a justiça
Ashay, for
social,
people who
o
are from
fortalecimento dos povos
Ashay, the role of
terreiros e o combate ao
philanthropy
racismo
for social
religioso,
justice in
meus
strengthening
objetivos na pesquisa é
devotees
justamente
of African Brazilian
visibilizar essas
religions
lutas
and fighting
trabalhizadas pelos
religious
terreiros de matriz africana,
racism.
que buscam o
Basically,
fortalecimento das suas
those
comunidades e dos
candomblé
seus territórios,
temples, they
e também
provide
destacar o
support
papel da
to the
filantropia no combate
territories.
ao racismo religioso
It's
a partir da
important to
doação de
highlight the
recursos.
role
A minha pesquisa
philanthropy
tem uma
plays
dimensão
in
pessoal, toda pesquisa tem uma dimensão
fighting
pessoal, né?
religious
E a gente está aqui
racism.
falando de
My
pessoas,
research
pesquisadores
is
que
really
estão
linked to
diretamente ligados
myself
aos seus territórios, às
personally,
suas comunidades, aos terreiros que
and
dão
we are going
produção.
to talk about
Eu
people
sou
who
uma
are
mulher
producing
negra
their
e
own
eu coloco a minha
knowledge.
experiência
I
na
am
execução de
a
projetos com
devotee of an
finalidades de
African
direitos
Brazilian
humanos, onde desde
religion.
2020 eu passei a coordenar o edital Enfrentando o Racismo a partir da Base, que é um edital que nos últimos anos tem apoiado o fortalecimento institucional de organizações, de coletivos liderados por mulheres e homens negros e negras que atuam pelo avanço da justiça racial no Brasil. E a gente não pode falar de justiça racial no Brasil sem falar dos terreiros de matriz africana. Então, os terreiros com os quais eu tenho me relacionado e que são objeto da minha pesquisa, o que eles fazem é lutar por justiça racial. É o que faz o Instituto da Mulher Negra Mãe Hilda de Tolu, que é uma organização que se origina no terreiro Ilê Axé de Tolu, um dos mais tradicionais do Brasil, localizado na Bahia, que atua pelo fortalecimento econômico das mulheres negras, pela preservação da memória e da luta dessas mulheres. A Atracá, que é uma organização do estado de Goiás, que tem atuado pela formalização jurídica dos terreiros na região de Águas de Lindóia. Eu conversei com a liderança da Atracá e ele tem me dito que o processo de regularização dos terreiros tem trazido segurança jurídica, os terreiros têm se sentido mais seguros depois de terem conseguido o seu CNPJ, porque havia o medo de represália aos cultos por eles não terem registro. A tenda de Umbanda Caboclo Flecheiro, um terreiro de Pernambuco, em Olinda, que durante a pandemia e ainda hoje distribui cestas básicas para famílias em situação de vulnerabilidade e promove ações no campo da educação antirracista, em parceria com escolas públicas de Olinda, tem uma biblioteca comunitária que funciona dentro do terreiro, o coletivo Iacobi Odê, ligado ao terreiro Abassá de Ogum, também na Bahia, que promove ações de cuidado e autocuidado para mulheres negras, o Instituto Reparação, que realiza acompanhamento jurídico de denúncias de racismo religioso contra terreiros de candomblé. Então, a gente vê por esse mosaico que os terreiros eles são espaços de religiosidade e são espaços políticos. E sobre a segunda parte da pergunta que você me faz, Lua, sobre o que os terreiros têm a ensinar para a filantropia, eu vou tomar emprestado uma ideia que o Antônio Bispo dos Santos compartilha no livro A Terra Dá, a Terra Quer, que é esse livro aqui, não sei se vocês conseguem ver, recomendo a leitura, quando ele fala da ideia de transfluência e de confluência. O bispo, que era um homem quilombola, ele nos ajuda a compreender que os quilombos, mas aí eu vou trazer a ideia dele para os terreiros, não são lineares. Então, quando a filantropia diz, eu não posso apoiar organizações
Can't support
religiosas,
religious
ela tem
organizations.
capacidade de compreender que, para nós, povos de terreiro, povos de matriz africana, a espiritualidade não está separada da ação política. Nós não somos dicotômicos, não somos uma coisa ou outra. Um terreiro tem religião, tem cultura, tem arte, tem educação e tem política. Então, quando a filantropia opera numa lógica colonialista, dicotômica, binária, faz essa separação e se recusa a
Has
apoiar
this
os terreiros de
separation and
matriz
doesn't
africana, ela está
support the
reproduzindo o racismo e está
African
contribuindo para a
matrix
manutenção da
grounds,
exclusão dos
they
terreiros de matriz
continue
africana. E a outra questão
maintaining the
que
exclusion
a
of these
pesquisa
grounds.
traz,
And my
que a filantropia
research
precisa compreender, é que é preciso
shows, and
democratizar o
philanthropy
acesso
has
a
to show,
recursos.
is that you
A
have
minha
to have
pesquisa mostra que quanto mais
democratic
exigências as
resources. The more
fundações
requirements that
estabelecem
the
para que
foundations
terreiros,
establish
para que
so that
comunidades tradicionais
traditional
consigam acessar
communities
recursos,
or ritual
mais elas
grounds have
contribuem para a
access to
exclusão.
results, they
Conseguir a formalização, por
contribute for
exemplo, é uma grande
exclusion.
dificuldade para os
It's a great
terreiros. Eu acabei de
difficulty.
citar uma
I
organização
just
de
mentioned an
pesquisa que faz
organization
esse
that I
trabalho
study
porque
that does this work
regularizar, formalizar
because to
os
have a
CNCNPJ é uma
formal
grande dificuldade
tax number
para os
is very
povos de terreiro,
difficult
porque o
for
racismo
these
tem
people
excluído a
who
população negra do
live in
desenvolvimento
these
econômico.
candomblé
Então, ter
temples. So
CNPJ
to have a
por meio do
CNPJ
edital,
tax
o
number so that
tempo,
they can be
tanto
part
tempo de
of
CNPJ ativo,
funds, have
mostrar
access to funds, to
declarações,
show that they have bank
comprometimento, por
statements
exemplo,
and
são
bylaws, for
empecilhos, sim,
example,
para os
they
terreiros.
are
Então, essas
stumbling
são as
blocks
duas
for
mensagens
these
que os terreiros de matriz africana trazem ao campo
terreiros
da
and
filantropia.
African matrix
Religiosidade
areas.
política não se
Political
separam
religion,
desse espaço e
religiousness isn't
democratizar o
separated in this
acesso a
space.
recursos é desburocratizar, simplificar.
And all this.
Muito obrigada, Mai. Nossa, muito importante, né, a sua pesquisa para a gente refletir acerca da democratização dos recursos. E eu fico pensando aqui também como que a gente percebe que há uma desconexão entre o campo filantrópico e a atuação de grupos que são ditos mais marginalizados, que passam, né, por desafios constantes para mobilizar recursos. E aí eu gostaria de chamar o nosso colega Albert, que
Albert,
tem uma pesquisa
that
muito
has
legal
a very
também, e sua pesquisa
interesting
mostra
research that
qual a
shows
relação dos
the
movimentos sociais de
relationship
moradia
between the
e das
social
organizações de
movements for
base que você
housing
tem
and
entrevistado
also
com a
the
filantropia comunitária.
grassroots movements
Albert, você
with
pode contar um
community
pouco também da sua pesquisa para a
philanthropy.
gente, por
Albert,
favor?
can you tell us a bit more about your
Sim, sim.
research?
Oi, gente.
Yes, hi.
Bom dia.
Good
Eu
morning
sou o
to all.
Albert.
I'm Albert.
Sou uma pessoa de pele clara, cabelo
I
liso, meio
am
ondulado,
a light
nem grande nem curto,
black person. I
uma camisa
don't
preta
have long hair or
com um
short
pouco
hair.
de
I'm
barba
wearing
no rosto.
a black
Eu
t-shirt and I've got
faço
a bit of
pesquisa
stubble. And I
no âmbito do programa Saberes da Rede Comuá,
am
intitulado A
working
Dificuldade de Acesso a Recursos dos Movimentos Sociais
in this area of
e a
social
Construção de uma Nova
movements.
Cultura Política de Doação. De fato, existe uma
And
desconexão entre a
yes, there's
filantropia,
a
sobretudo
mismatch
a
between
tradicional,
philanthropy,
e os movimentos sociais
especially
livres
the
e
traditional
comunitários.
one, and the
O
social
termo
movements.
filantropia, inclusive, é um termo que para nós causa
This term
estranhamento,
is a
para
bit
nós dos movimentos
strange
sociais, e eu
for
acredito
us
que
from
muito disso
social
é
movements, and a
decorrente
lot of
de
this
alguns
is
métodos e tipos da
because
filantropia
of
tradicional
some
que muitas vezes
methods
querem medir,
that
enfim,
want to
colocar coisas que
measure
não necessariamente são
or include
registradas
things that
no trabalho dos
can't be
territórios,
included
dos
in the
processos
work
de
of the
escolha.
territory,
Eles estão querendo encaixar a luta por direitos
and trying
num
to
formato
measure
mercantilista de
things
doação.
in a
Mas
more
partindo do ponto de vista
direct
entre os movimentos sociais
format. But
e os de base
seeing this
comunitária com a
social
filantropia
movement
comunitária, eu acho que
and
existe duas
community
diferenças,
movement,
né?
I think there
Eu
are
acho que
two
tem um
important
esforço que a
aspects.
filantropia
One,
comunitária tem
there's an
feito, existe
effort
de fato um esforço da filantropia comunitária, aquela que está no território, de construir
of the
pontes de
people who
apoio a
are in the
organizações
territory
que
and
nos
are building
tempos
bridges and
difíceis,
supporting
como as organizações
organizations.
do
We have
empresariado, que atuam
seen
nos
many
territórios
organizations that
através do que é
work
conhecido
in
Saberes,
the
bem como
territories
outras
trying to
organizações, e
learn
construindo
all the
pontes no território
knowledge and all the also the
comunitário,
changes in the
mas também
territories.
tem um outro
But there's
aspecto que
also
é a
another
dificuldade
aspect, which is a
enfim,
difficulty
a própria filantropia
which
comunitária tem
philanthropy
de atuar com esses
brings
grupos
itself
marginalizados, né?
of
Os
working
desafios
with these
reais que essas
marginalized groups. They
organizações têm
have real
enfrentado, as
challenges.
organizações que eu entrevistei,
The
que vivem numa
organizations which I
moradia em Salvador
interviewed
e as unidades de
in
base comunitária
Salvador
também,
in
aqui na
terms
região
of
da Bahia,
housing and
mas
also here
enfrentam,
in
né,
Bahia. But they're
de
not the only
trabalhar
ones.
em espaços
They
onde estão
work
precarizados
in
pelos seus
very precarious places.
como elas já vivem essa
And as they already live this situation of lack of housing and work, it's difficult to mobilize resources. For example, in terms of housing, it's very clear that in the territories where they are active, people want a roof over their heads, and they also want health and safety and food. These organizations know the territories where I work. And that is why the demands aren't fulfilled. I think that once the results of my research, we're trying to provoke this field, and we have concrete challenges. We have to establish the needs and abandon some practices and vices of traditional philanthropy, but at the same time, there's a work of using traditional philanthropy so that we can communicate this in the territories. It's very important for the movements and the social movements and community movements. This is a historic movement, and it is recognized in the territories and, well, in the field against any problems related to climate change and the development of the communities for social and environment projects. It's important that the field understands this and include these organizations and build practices which allow these people to have more access to resources. And to end, I would like to call to see the booklet which I launched recently, which talks about this booklet, which is a guide of how to access resources at a community base, and we can make this link available and follow the development till the end. We still have some findings. I think that's what I had to say. Thank you. Albert, very good, very interesting. I find it interesting how all these researchers are interconnected when we think of these different territories and communities that many times are far from funding and with very little can transform many things. So continuing here with our presentations, I was also thinking of the work which Anderson is following. There is a gap in communication between philanthropy, this mainstream philanthropy, and the groups that they want to support. And Anderson, what has your research found about the role of journalism for this information and consequently the resources which are necessary to reach to the grassroots? What work can we do brick by brick to transform this philanthropic reality so that the money really reaches where it has to reach and bring more social justice? Thank you very much, Lua. Good morning to all. I'm Anderson. I'm a black man, black hair. I wear glasses. I have a short beard, and I'm wearing a yellow T-shirt right in front of this that blue background. My research is exactly what you said. It's the reference of brick by brick, the experience of creating a community of supporters for journalism, local, peripheral, independent journalism here in Brazil. To start off, I would like to talk a bit about my childhood. And I think that is in the mind of many people who live in favelas in Brazil, which is the day when we go to the slab, we invite our friends to come to our part so that we can build something on top of that slab. And that's going to save, for example, the raindrops in our house. So we call our friends to build this slab on top of our house. So this is what I thought about the outskirts, where I am a co-director in journalism and I'm a co-business director. So that's where we started our campaign to find and communicate so that people can all come together and work together with us. And then you ask me about this gap in communication. Well, we have heard already other people talking about that, and that in journalism isn't different. I think communication in journalism in relation to philanthropy is a bit more difficult. There are players in the movement who do not want to talk about philanthropy for the people of the worship temples and the people that we were talking about. There are people who don't want to talk about that. So when I started doing my research with supporters from the Mural Agency, people who support our agency for some time, and also 12 other Brazilian organizations and one from Colombia, so that we could talk to these organizations in terms of journalism, I almost went back and I said, no, I even mentioned this to Yasmin, and I said, I'm going to give up because I just cannot find philanthropy amongst all these people, which I don't know where to go. And I think we talked a bit more, and I understood that today, in 2024, the network of supporters is not the solution for communicators and journalists who want to do this communication role in these communities. So afterwards, going on in this path, I saw that it is very important, because this network of supporters that's there, even though it's very small, it might not mean 1% in this of funding of the Mural Agency during the year. It is a network for support, as the Mural Agency and others that I mentioned are doing. So this is a support network which is very important for different areas. It's important to strengthen not only the funding of these organizations, but also the validation, dissemination of these organizations, and that there is this support network. I have two practical examples at Mural. Mural started as a journalist blog and then became an organization. And their first campaign was a campaign not to pay for our journalism. It was to pay for us to become formal, because just like as the Candomblé grounds, we also have to be an entity. We also share the problem, as Mariana mentioned, and we were able to do that. We obtained 300 people who believed in our idea to fund our CNPJ tax number and accountant. I also have another example from Paraíba Feminina. She's a journalist in the state of Paraíba who was almost closing her journalist portal because she didn't have a computer. After the pandemics, her computer just broke down, but she was able to buy a new computer, and now we continue having this journalism for women in Paraíba, for that territory. So I think this research brought, first I wanted to give up, but then I want to show you the potential of these people who are making a difference. And one of the findings was that within the communication in journalism, we identified in our challenges the challenge of communication itself. we sometimes don't know how to sell what we do. We can't measure our impact. We can't measure this the way the market or the field of philanthropy wants us to measure.
Quer que faça,
Or
vamos dizer assim, mostre realmente
the
o
way
nosso
we
trabalho do
really
jeito que o
can
cliente pede.
show
Então, a gente tem
our
que ter um
work the
pouco disso por
way
trás
that
da
the
comunicação
field
para que a
wants
gente
us to
possa
show it. So we have to
falar
overcome
melhor
this
sobre o que significa o
communication
jornalismo, né,
aspect. What
dentro
does
das
journalism
comunidades. E
mean
também
within the
o desafio da
communities?
própria cultura
And
democrática
also
no
the
Brasil, né? Porque
challenge
eu falo
of
frequentemente, assim,
the
quando a gente
donation culture
discute
in
isso,
Brazil. That's what I
eu
said
jogo
right
aqui
at the
também, inclusive,
beginning.
para quem está nos ouvindo
And
aqui
also those
agora,
of you who are
ao
listening
vivo
to
ou
us
gravado, eu
now,
queria perguntar
I
quanto que vocês
ask
doam por mês,
myself, how much do
por
you
semana, do
donate
seu
a
tempo,
month, a week,
do seu
a
dinheiro,
day, of
né?
your
Quanto,
work, of your
quais são os
time, of
veículos
your
de
money?
comunicação e
So
jornalismo
which is the
independente, impresso,
communication
local, que vocês apoiam? Porque
vehicles that
eu
you
acho que a gente,
support every
quando a gente
day?
fala da cultura
I
de
think when
doação, a
we
gente precisa
talk about
voltar,
the
né,
donation
para
culture, we have
entender
to
também
look into
esse
ourselves
presente de alguma
and think
forma.
about this as
E
well.
aí, para chegar um pouco nessa
And
na
to
conclusão,
come
assim,
to
eu
my
queria dizer que
conclusion, I would
eu
like
tenho
to
chamado
say
dessa história
that
do novo jornalismo.
I
Sabe?
call this the
Essas
new
ações que você está
journalism.
fazendo, essas
What's
organizações que
being
estão
done
fazendo,
in the
é esse novo
field
jornalismo.
is
Ele é
this new
periférico, ele é
journalism.
local, ele é
It's
diferente
in the periphery,
e
it's
ele é
local,
diferente
and
do
it's
que a gente também está
different
vendo
of
na
what
mídia
we
tradicional do
are seeing
influenciador, né?
in
Ele é
the
diferente porque a gente usa
social
técnicas, a
media
gente usa
of the in terms of influencers,
jeitos,
because we
caminhos.
use
Então, para
techniques
fazer isso
and
acontecer, e
ways
eu
of
fico
making
falando
this
também
happen. And I
sobre
also
o que eu estou
say
pensando, é que
about
esse
what I'm
jornalismo que a gente
saying is
precisa
that this
fazer de
journalism that
comunicação,
we
essa
have to do,
comunicação,
this communication we
ela
must
precisa ser
have,
um pouco algo tipo
is
o SUS.
communication,
Hoje a
which
gente
is
vive o
like
SUS, o SUS está
the
completando 34 anos,
Brazilian health
e a gente precisa comemorar o SUS,
public
e o
health
SUS
system, the
está
SUS,
crescendo, né?
S-U-S.
Tudo que a
We
gente
have to
bebe de
celebrate
água, tudo que
every
a gente faz de
glass
comida,
of
o
water
SUS está
that we
por trás.
drink.
E eu acho
SUS
que para
is
manter
behind
uma
that. And to
sociedade
maintain
democrática,
a
a gente precisa
democratic
olhar para a nossa
society, we
comunicação,
have to
para essa
look at our
comunicação independente,
communication
como
to
se
this
fosse o SUS,
independent
assim,
communication
para que a
as
gente
if it
possa
were
ter
the SUS, the
essa
Brazilian
comunicação
health system, so
livre,
that
né,
we have
democrática,
a
para que a gente
free,
possa
independent
saber
communication
melhor para
so that
quais
we
caminhos a gente vai seguir,
know
por exemplo, em um
where we
ano
want
como a
to
gente
go
está
in an
tendo
electoral
esse
year
ano. E
as
os
we have
apoiadores
this
é uma
year. And the
peça-chave, é
supporters are a key
chave
person
nesse caminho. Por
in
quê?
this role.
Lembra da história do encher a laje?
Let
Talvez
me
eles não
think
estejam
of
todos os dias, talvez eles não
helping
estejam
to
ao
fix
nosso
the
alcance
slab
ali
on top
com
of
o
my
fogãozinho, mas
house.
daqui a
Maybe
pouco,
they
quando a gente
can't do that
precisar encher a
every
laje,
day,
eles
but
vão estar
one day
lá
when they
enchendo
have
lá
to go
fora.
and
E
help
a
us,
gente
they
precisa
will be
falar
supporting
disso, a
us,
gente precisa
and we have
chamar
to
eles
talk
para lá.
about this. We
Então,
have to
a
call
minha
them to
pesquisa,
help
né,
us. So my
traz um pouco
research
dessa referência,
brings a bit
pouco a
about this
pouco,
reference,
casa
and
por
step by
casa,
step,
tijolo por tijolo, para a gente
each
fazer essa
brick by brick,
favela
so
gigante, essa
that we can
comunidade
have this
gigante e
gigantic
fortalecer. Se a
favela
gente,
and
se o
strengthen
Mural
it.
representa um
Because
ponto
if
de vista de
Mural is
14
an
anos,
organization which is
não dá para dizer que a gente
active
não
for
é uma
14
organização
years, we can't
sustentável.
say
A
that
gente
we're
é uma
not a
organização
sustainable
sustentável. A gente só
organization.
está
We are
aqui por
sustainable,
conta
but
desses
we're only here
apoiadores. Esses
because of these
apoiadores que estão por trás desse
supporters
nosso
that
jornalismo.
have
E aí,
helped
só uma
us.
última coisa para fechar mesmo. Eu queria
And the
pedir
last
também
thing I
para
would
quem
like to
está
say
em
is
novembro,
that
é
I would like to
aniversário
invite
do
everybody
Mural,
who's
nosso
here in
aniversário de
November.
34 também, próximo
I'm
agora.
turning 34 and Mural is
E a gente
turning
vai lançar
14
essa,
years.
o resultado dessa pesquisa é um guia.
And the
Então,
result of
todas
this research is
essas
going to be
lições, esses
launched.
aprendizados das
So we are
organizações, dos
sharing all of
apoiadores,
those
vai funcionar
lessons
num
with
guia
you,
para que outras
and we
pessoas também
are
possam fazer a gestão
publishing a
pública deles,
guide so
fazer
that other
acontecer
people can
da
learn
mesma forma.
the
Então,
the
peço para todo
path
mundo ficar
to
ligado lá na
get
Agência Mural,
funds.
apoiar a Agência
So
Mural
pay
também.
attention to
No
Agência
chat e
Mural,
ficar de olho
and
também
here in the
ouvindo
chat there's
esse produto
information
manual.
available. In
E aí, para
November we
continuar
are
a
releasing
conversa,
our guide.
que está
And
muito
for
bom,
us
está
to continue
maravilhosa. E a
this
gente está falando de
conversation,
vários
this
lugares, tem
wonderful
coisa que a gente falou dentro dos
conversation,
bastidores aqui, é
we
que
are
pela
in
primeira vez a gente
different
está vendo um
areas of
movimento de
Brazil,
pesquisadores muito
and
diversos,
there's
de
a
vários
movement
lugares, de
of
vários tempos,
researchers
e
who
eu
are
queria chamar para a
diverse and
roda
coming
a
from
Mel,
different
que ela está
areas.
olhando para
I would like
movimentos
to
e organizações
talk
trans
to
fora,
Mel,
numa
and
questão
Mel
super
is doing
importante
work
hoje, que é a
on
questão climática,
transgender
né?
people
E aí, Mel, eu
and
queria
the
te ouvir,
climate
assim, o que que você está
issue. And I'd
descobrindo
like to listen to
nesse
Mel.
caminhar da sua pesquisa a
What
partir
have you
desses
been been learning in your research by means of fighting transphobia in the environmental sector? Thank you, Anderson. Good morning. Guys, I'll try to speak slowly. I would just like to say my name. My name is Amy Mel de Souza, not da Silva. So I would like to correct my name. My name is Emily Mel Fernandez de Souza, and I like people to call me Mel. I am a travesti. I'm medium height. I have curly hair. I'm wearing red lipstick, and my glasses have black rims, and I'm wearing a yellow dress as well. My work is focused on environmental transphobia, and basically what the trans movement teaches us is that we need to move forward. I did work connected to Fundo Positivo, and we were focusing on climate justice for transgender people, which is highly powerful. And basically, what we wanted to do was to highlight what the transgender movement does. And we noticed, basically, we realized that there are some gaps, but also power in the work we do. When we consider the gaps in the scientific production, is that when we consider transgender people and climate justice, there's a negligence in terms of studies because the transgender population is not seen economically and academically, and our voice is not taken into account when shaping public policies. Basically, we need to transform this reality so that transgender voices are heard in climate justice. When one thing that we did with NOSAS was to teach people about the transgender community. And we've noticed that the work we do is takes into account the transgender community and the LGBTQ plus community as well. It's important that we share the knowledge and amplify it. Not only transgender people, but also funders, it's important that they engage in the fight, in our struggle, because the moment you understand the need to struggle, then you can do work in a more integrated way. One thing that we realized was that initiatives connected to Fundo Positivo, Fundo Casas, and others, we realized that there's a limited number of initiatives. For instance, NOSAS acknowledged that there is a limitation in economic resources. Those resources do not cater to the needs of that population. We know that the intersection of oppressions limits the role of transgender people. Another thing that we have noticed is the exclusion and marginalization caused by environmental transphobia. Transgender people are the first ones to be hit by the climate change, the impacts of climate change, and they're the last ones to get support to fight it. So it's important that we acknowledge this exclusion, and we also need to understand environmental transphobia in order to fight it. Also, the movement needs to provide support to transgender people. When we consider the transgender movement, and we see that some actions are targeted at fighting environmental transphobia. And oftentimes the transgender movement is facing so many problems that it's hard to have access to funds. We also face institutional and social barriers. People at NOSAS, they told us that they were discriminated against by some funders. some very important funders, they ignore them. And they notice that certain funds wouldn't provide them with the support. They thought that there is a limitation of philanthropy funds targeted at LGBTQ plus movements. Therefore, transgender people need to have access to specific funds. We're not talking about donations, we're talking about basic rights to enable the lives and survival of transgender people. It's important that we foster a culture of transgender donation, of donation for transgender movements. Basically, we noticed that there are some initiatives that are self-managed. Some of them are a set of women who do work with little or no funds, but they do work. They're committed to their cause. They are highly resilient. And at the same time, they foster formation and training initiatives. In spite of the challenges, they're doing the best that they can do. They're engaged in their cause. It's really important to approach those issues. One quote that we heard from one of the participants, and she was like, she told us, when we have no resources, we do something. When we do have resources, we do so much more. There were partnerships with NOSAs and other private institutions, and this is highly important when we reflect upon climate justice, because this is key for us to overcome barriers and make activities more effective. Another thing that we noticed in our movement is the need to include the climate, the environmental agenda in the transgender movement. This agenda is highly urgent because transgender people are usually neglected in public policies. Therefore, these movements oftentimes they say that they represent all, but they overlook transgender people. Climate justice means including marginalized voices at the center of the discussion so that all of us have a seat at the table as concerns climate justice. And the last topic is education and raising awareness. In some of the interviews we conducted, people showed lack of knowledge as regards environmental issues. Not only do we need to raise people awareness on the environment, but also on gender issues, because people need to be able to understand what's going on so that they can adapt to the climate transition. While conducting the research, we noticed that people become more qualified and then they can take action. And just to finish, we are finishing a book on this, but the transgender movement, when we consider climate action, we have some axes of action, and we show our capacity of resilience and performance. We've noticed that transgender people have been active in doing agroecology training, for instance. We also do qualified advocacy, because the transgender people who joined us, they do work as regards climate justice, and they're fighting for basic rights. Also, when raising awareness and putting together informational folders, we are sending them domestically and also internationally, because we want to cater to changes. Oftentimes, we learn that we shouldn't stick to our bubble. We need to talk to everybody. And one thing that caught my eye, is that today we talk about the violence that transgender people face in climate justice spaces. Basically, we make this violence visible, and we do it by doing advocacy. So we put together informational materials, and in Comuá blog, there is information about transgender people too, and our Instagram is available too, which is at Justas, Justas. Feel free to follow us. Mel, you're amazing. It's really important to listen to people and listen to you as well. We need to understand and listen to the voices of people who are suffering the most. Oftentimes, we have access to data and information, but listen to people's stories and narratives is key. I would like to listen to Maira. She's conducting Maria. She's conducting a very important research, and she's talking about underfinancing for travesti organizations and transsexual women organizations in Brazil. Please, Maria. Guys, can you hear me well? Okay, I'll speak up. Hi, guys. Good morning. I'm sorry I'm late. You know, I joined the Black Feminist Fund meeting, and I've just finished that meeting and logged here. I'm in Paris. It's 5 p.m. and I've spent all day working. And I'm in a different mood than you guys. You're in the morning. I'm really tired. I'm at the afternoon, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you, learning from you, and it's really good to listen to Mel and to listen to her research. And I believe that our team in the research, the Saberes research, all of us contribute to overcome gaps, obvious gaps. But right now, two researches within the Saberes program are focused on connecting philanthropy and transgender organizations. My research is Cadê o Aqué? Where's the money? Mapping the lacks and the mismatch between the possibilities of organizations of travesti and transsexual women and philanthropy in Brazil. We're focusing not only on environmental issues, but we're focusing specifically on gender, and we are focused on the work done by travesti organizations and transsexual women organizations. Basically, we want to strengthen the agenda of the travesti movement and transsexual women movements in Brazil. It's really important to highlight that in 2024, it's been 20 years since the 29th of January was set as the day for transgender visibility in Brazil. Therefore, we want to keep doing the work and answer to certain questions. What took us to this moment, and what's the future ahead of us? And when we consider a transnational scenario of attacks to transgender people all over the world, not only in Brazil, but also in the UK, in the US, and every single day new legislation is being set forth in the US, for instance, and in Africa, where billions of dollars are being poured into the country so that anti-transgender people legislation is approved in Africa. There's an investment and there's an effort to strengthen our alliances. We know we've been attacked, but who are the ones that are financing and funding our resistance? So these things are important for us to bear in mind. This research was conducted from questionnaire, some forms that were sent to travestis and transsexual women from different parts of Brazil. And we considered the lack of things, and some of the data that we collected, the data revealed us a scenario that we knew already, but we need numbers. The numbers are important. And some of the numbers that we have collected from my research is that 100% of organizations told us that they don't have the funds to keep their activities. 70% of those organizations have less than 50,000 Brazilian reais, less than $10,000 available for the full year, and they have poor institutional structure. Therefore, it's difficult for them to have access to funds, and this is quite visible. And we can change this reality. We have the numbers. There's a number of funds providing support to travesti organizations and transgender organizations in Brazil. Some funders were mentioned. I can talk about Fundo Positivo, Fundo Brasil de Direitos Humanos, Fundo Elas, Casa Fluminense, and other foreign funds, but some things need to be done as regards those partnerships.
Many
Oftentimes, those
times,
mismatches are difficult. For instance, having formal registry and the red tape as a whole. The red tape is a hurdle.
sometimes you don't have access to funding. Another example of how bureaucracy doesn't allow trans organizations to have access to these fundings are the forms themselves, the way the funds require and understand the application form, the denial of allowing some flexibility, the mobilizations of transvestites. They talk with people, but what's written there as a desire when they describe the project might not be the urgency that is needed for the funding. So the organizations have to be flexible. They have to be flexible in how they implement the resources and this bureaucracy of how you account for it. So that we need a negotiation between trying to have access to the funding, but also how we have a relationship during and even afterward when we write the reporting. So all this quantitative and qualitative data show that these organization of transsexual and transvestite women have to access funding, and that this funding must be substantial, that really allows us to do some work and not only to make shift, as Mel said, with a little bit you can do something. Imagine with a well structured and solid basis. So this funding has to be flexible, as I mentioned, and it also has to be based on trust. So for us to make this feasible, what these organizations are thinking for the future, there are two things that we have to bear in mind. When there's a anti-gender, anti-right offensive, or whichever way you want to believe, I think funding, support, and developing partnership relationship with trans and transvestite organizations is to strengthen democracy itself. When we see the erosion itself, this is not me. I'm still speaking here. But going back on how, when there's an erosion in the democracy, strengthening these organizations should be seen as something that is essential in defending democratic values that we defend so much. So these organizations, despite the absence and the need of including models that not necessarily dialogue with the realities, what is implemented by these philanthropic agencies, can lead to a future, and they invite philanthropy to share this dream with them. And part of the dream is building more horizontal relationship, dialogic relationship. I think in 8 minutes, that's what I have to say to you. I hope to write something for the Comuá blog by the end of this month, and I hope to be able to disclose the result of this research by the end of the month. Thank you very much. And the Oscar goes to, well, with the work we're doing with the researchers, I say, if you don't have much money and we can do something, imagine with more money what we can do. So imagine what we could do with all these organizations. So now I would like to call Regis about the Black youth within the Casa Fund and the research he is doing. So let's see what the youth is doing with the resources they received. Thank you very much, Regis, for the question. Anderson, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For those who are listening to the recording, I am not sad. I am just slightly hoarse, but I am a young Black man. I'm wearing black. I've got a beard. I am wearing a black shirt and pullover. So I will start by saying that I do my research with the traditional and peripheral youth accessing funding, the work of community philanthropy and social environmental justice based on the experience of the social environmental Casa Fund. It's interesting to see this relationship, as this has been mentioned. These groups are already doing a lot with very little resources. So the purpose of this research is to see the demands that the Casa, Fundo Casa receives and what they do with very little resources. Here we have an analysis of the past 4.5 years. 2024 is the whole year, but we look from 2020 up to the first half of 2024, where we can see the enormous demand of organizations and collectives which are led by the Brazilian youth. And during this period, the Fundo Casa, through the tender for bills, if we understand how organizations have access to funding for the first time, we have a demand of 19 million reais throughout 182 projects. In the project, we can see what we were able to support with what we received. Here in Brazil, we can see a division by region of the 176 projects that we supported during the 4.5 years. And this is 4,200 million reais, which were donated directly to the organizations, which were led by organizations headed by the youth up to 29 years of age. So 43% of the demand that we receive, and we can see that in There's a greater concentration in the north and northeast for the Amazon region, Pará, Recife, and Pernambuco, that has a very active youth and a great demand. And with regard to biomes, we can see an expressive figure in terms of the Amazon and the Atlantic rainforest. Many of these tenders where they access funding, they had some specific aspects such as the legal Amazon region or the Southeast region together with the Atlantic rainforest. So we see an increase in the support that we have been having in these youth organizations in the first half of 2024. We have a great diversity of the youth who have accessed the funds. They're activists, indigenous population, agricultures, quilombola, which account for 8%. And also, I would like to highlight the first half of 2024, when I was talking to people from the Comuá Network, the importance of the different themes. So, support these agendas. Only the minority groups, as I mentioned, the indigenous, the quilombola, runaway enslaved people. So only in the first half of 2024, of all the 8.2 million reais, 3.5 million was donated in the first half of 2024. And that accounts for 41% of all the resources which was donated in the past 4.5 years. And also, I would like to highlight the projects which are led by women who are heading these initiatives.
E trazendo pouco sobre
And
esse destaque para o
talking a bit about what we did in the first half of 2024, we can see an enormous increase which the Fundo Casa had to support the youth and that led to fair climatic solutions led in the peripheral youth. And this was also mentioned at COP28, where we called the Brazilian youth to talk about climate funding and understand which are the gaps and the difficulties that the youth can access funding. And Albert, Mel, Maria have talked about the lack of flexibilities in the tenders and also the bureaucratic process.
A questão de exigência de CNPJ,
of requiring a CNPJ tax number. And we can see that we have a request of 149 projects in 23 states, and we can support 35 organizations in 18 states. And this was only for this youth request for a bid. They were able to present organizations through a partnering organizations, and 57% of these projects were led by women. So this is an outlook of 5 years of the Casa Fund, and this is one organization, the results of one organization of the 18 participants of the Comuá Network. Last week, we launched another initiative. Can you see it here? Which is funding for local climate solutions and scenarios for philanthropy. And here, this is very similar to the research we're doing. There's a majority of projects in the Amazon region and rainforest, Atlantic rainforest, and many the Comuá people supporting women and Black people. So there is work in philanthropy and social justice being done, and this publication has enriching information for this as well as for the justice. Thank you. So now, connecting all this and understanding the experience that we have with other researchers. So we have Albert, Mel, Maria talking about the difficulties that the movements have to access the resources. I would like to ask Carol, because based on our research, we have tried to find concrete results of community philanthropy in different contexts. And what can you do with little resources, as Anderson asked? So apart from this, what do you think is the role in producing knowledge to support community philanthropies and also social environmental justice? What's the importance of Saberes in this aspect? And what is that? What's it been like for you? Thank you very much. I would like to say that I believe that community philanthropy deals with connection among people. How can we work together? How can we make the work visible? So when I study about this, and when I interview people who answered my interview, that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to share what my survey was like at Saberes. I had something, the podcast. It's called Minha História de Doação, My Donation Story. It was launched recently, and I'm telling the life history of the people. It talks about content and the people who promote community philanthropy and donations within their territory. So who are these people? What's her life story? How did it connect with other people so that we could disseminate this information? So through the Saberes project in the Comuá, I was in 32 cities, and I went by car to participate with the people that we interviewed. And many of the questions I asked were, who you are, why did you dedicate yourself to the third sector and building a donation culture? And how do you believe other people can help you do this together with you? So we have to see how you engage the community, how you bring people together so that you can recognize this work. A lot of my mission and what I would like to talk about is to burst the bubble, not people who only work in the third sector. So the result of my product, although it might look like research, it communicates with everybody. It's not only in the academic area. And that way, anybody can hear these stories and identify with them. And through this identification, they can be seen as a person who can do this dissemination. That's what I show in my podcast. And that way they can be more active in the third sector. I'm going to ask I had to put a short video teaser of my podcast. If you want to follow it, you can follow it. This is a teaser, okay? Just to give you an idea of how it starts.
Botamos as malas no carro e pegamos a estrada.
We put our suitcases in the car and we went to register the story of people who did amazing things through their lives. The 33 towns, 20 interviews, and 14 workshops. Every day is a day to donate. And this is how we can see how the NGOs work. And you can follow this in my podcast, My Story of Donation. And you can also follow this process. Come on with us. Come on, join us.
Então a ideia é que realmente seja algo
So
divertido.
the idea is for it to be something that's happy and fun, and that we acknowledge the people in relation to the third sector and how these donations make a difference in the life of the people. So we go through all these processes, which normally is done in a very technical and conceptual manner, but here we talk in a very simple and fun way, which is a fun way of donating, connecting the people, and how we communicate and how we present these narratives so that these narratives can communicate with the population. I think this bias, talking about narrative, connects a lot with what the movement for a donation means, is to promote engaging narratives. So based on a story where I identify myself or someone else does something, I can identify that they can do something else. I can materialize this for something that's very plausible and how that can change the lives of others. So this podcast will have 20 episodes. We did drive through all the regions of Brazil to see the different stories. The first one was launched on the 17th, and we have episodes up to the 17th of July 2025. So every fortnight, there will be a new podcast. So I would ask you to follow. I'm going to put the link here on the podcast, and it's a tool. You know, sometimes it's difficult for you to explain to your grandmother, your aunt, what you do, but this podcast will help people to understand. Oh, so these are the people, these are the stories of who are involved in the sector. So I think that's what I wanted to say about my project. Oh, but I'd like to add that through the podcast and recording the interviews, I used that each person that gave me the time of the interview and also welcomed me there at their house, and I saw the infrastructure to record her. We also had an event in each one of the cities that we interviewed someone. So we had 16 events. In fact, I'm in one of them here now. I'm in Manaus, where we have the engagement of local leaderships. So this person who we interviewed, they connect other NGOs in the town so that we can set up a meeting. And during the meeting, they can connect it and see who are the other partners and other NGOs that work in the same area. And that way, create a strategy for the dissemination of the culture of dissemination in that area. So we believe in this format. We call it community campaign within our network. So we have over 90 campaigns. This was how I decided to choose who are the leaders that are involved in the promotion of a national donation culture. So we have the interviews in the podcast and also the meetings in the territories that then turn into this material and content and strategies for the Day of Donation throughout Brazil. So that's my project. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you.
Massa, Carol, muito bacana. Já ativei o sininho aqui para ouvir todos os episódios.
Wonderful, Carol. I really want to check all of the episodes out. And you know, it's really important that we value the variety of knowledge production within the philanthropy system. So you go to different parts of Brazil and you listen people and learn from the work that they do. This is wonderful. And now connecting to what Lua said before, I would like to ask Ty a question. How can the knowledge that we shared here challenge and transform the power dynamics within the philanthropy system? Thank you for your question, Regis. before I attempt answering your question, I'll self-describe. I'm a Black woman wearing a burgundy shirt, and I'm wearing a tiara. And I also have the Comuá background here, and I would like to focus on the word transformation, which this month is the month that we celebrate philanthropy, the type of philanthropy that truly transforms lives. And I would like to celebrate all of you as well. I'll attempt to provide you with a straightforward answer. While I was listening to all of you, I believe that the challenges that we face, and now I'm seeing myself not only as a researcher, but also as an individual that is under scrutiny, we face the hegemony modus of philanthropy all the time. There is a relationship of being dominated and the people who dominate as well. So when we see the people in the territories and we see their challenges and how they change reality and actually deliver social transformation, why do they deliver social transformation? Because they change their narratives, they change their images. It's not only white, male, Catholic, straight who are there doing work. There's a change in the language, in the meaning of things. So basically, everything changed. It's a way of doing things that is not what people force us to do. And this connects to other things that you discussed during this conversation. But one thing that Maria Clara said touched me most. One thing that she talked about is red tape, and red tape is a way of criminalizing collectives and organizations. These excluding language that is in the calls for proposals. We've been seeing that the funds are making an effort to use an easier language, but still it's excluding language and also lack of flexibility. Usually there's no openness for what's needed for organizations. So oftentimes philanthropy institutions impose things. I know I sound radical, but that's exactly my point. Usually the system imposes what organizations must do, and then the scenario is quite strict. But connecting this to my research, and as everybody here, I face this scenario that punishes organizations. And as Mai said, all research connects to who we are. And my master thesis was written in the first person. And now I'm a doctorate candidate and I'm doing the same thing. In 2014, I founded a sports NGO in Ceará, which is in the northeast of Brazil. And my accent shows that I'm from the northeast of Brazil. And the organization that I co-founded and then that I directed until last year, it was focused on sports for women and girls. And for 4 years, I did the work in the organization. So I used to work every single day, all 24/7, because I had to support myself and I also had to run the organization on my own resources. I only made money out of, I was only paid in the organization when I was bound to leave. So, sometimes we would get resources from, we would try to get resources from governmental sources or private sources, and it was hard. And my research is on laws of incentives and exploring the relationship of funders, NGOs in sports. And we are trying to decolonize sports investment in Brazil. Oftentimes, I like to observe the impact of the law to stimulate sports in Brazil. I'm doing some research, and basically, I've learned from Albel Estrema. He's a Portuguese researcher, and I'm trying to learn from him and adapt this to my own research here in Brazil. And over the last year, I worked as a mentor. And based on my interactions with organizations, I've been observing some things. And I'm trying to create categories based on what I'm learning. So, considering the research I did within the Saberes program, I interacted with 11 NGOs in the northeast of Brazil and the north of Brazil as well. And we've noticed that those institutions face similar challenges. Basically, the scenario is that those organizations have little or no access to funds in Brazil, to private social investment whatsoever, because those organizations can't have access to that, to those resources. 34% of those NGOs, 75 or 100% of those NGOs, they rely on philanthropy funds, and they do the work by fostering sports when they depending on community donation. Oftentimes, the organizations fund themselves, and then they get some funds from other sources. Through the community philanthropy, there's an organization that is setting up a coalition in Paraíba, in Alagoas. And just to finish, what I've noticed in my work is that the organizations, they request resources within sports, but they do work in other areas as well. And one thing that I recommend, a text that was published here in Mamão com Rapadura, the thing is, oftentimes philanthropy doesn't want to invest in sports. But when we do invest in sports, when the organizations get the money to do core work, the communities receive support in other areas as well, not only sports. Therefore, the research is really fruitful. I'm really invested in the research, and I've been setting up other questions linked to it. So I'll just wrap up and pass it on to Yas. Basically, supporting sports is a way of supporting the communities. So I would like philanthropists to listen to me. You know, organizations and territories, they need to receive what they need. And it's important that we listen to people who do the work, the grassroots work in the territories. Thank you, Yas. Wonderful, guys. Thank you all. Thank you for sharing information on your research. And it's so nice to hear what you're doing, the research you're doing, the findings that you've reached. And I'll be sharing links in the chat. If people want to learn more about your research, click on the links that I'll share in the chat. And I would like you to provide, to answer this survey. And this survey, this short poll, is going to help us improve. Lua said one thing at the beginning, that it's important that we integrate local knowledge to the philanthropy ecosystem so that we overcome inequality, historical inequality. And I believe that this is really key for philanthropy to provide support. Also, Maya talked about making sure that candomblé temples have the support they need through philanthropy. So it's important to understand the critical role philanthropy can play at reviewing their own practices to democratize access to funds. And oftentimes, grassroots movements, they play a critical role not only to the rights of living, but the intersectional struggle. And we need to provide to see that their work goes beyond what we can actually see. And communities and movements, they need to be voiced, they need to be heard by the philanthropy. Philanthropy shouldn't be setting the agenda for them. And Anderson said one thing, that funding is not only providing resources, but also acknowledging the work done by grassroots movements and organizations, because they do work connected to community communication. And this is important for the struggle. And Mel told us about the importance of all of the topics that we addressed. Mel said that we need to observe the intersections in a very clear way. And one thing that she said, the quote, "When we have no money, we do something. When we have the money, we do much more." And also Maria approached this political context that we need to take into account the rights of minority groups. It's important that philanthropy reviews their own bureaucracy and identifies who benefits from the red tape that the philanthropy system uses, and how can the philanthropy system embrace the diversity of people. Regis talked about something else, and something that we've been discussing, which is the importance of specific calls for proposal and requests that are really targeted at certain groups, and more flexible types of support. And we know that it works. And when the resources are available for communities, we see amazing results. And Carolina's podcast provides us with certain results as regards engaging people. And another interesting thing about your work is that the process of collecting data to do the research, it enables you to learn and also to strengthen the initiatives, to acknowledge the initiatives. And Dai has mentioned that in her experience is the fact that philanthropy should not be suspicious of organizations, but do the work so that the organizations can actually move forward. And organizations, they are the leaders of their own story, the lead roles of their own narratives. It's important to rethink the processes. This has been an amazing conversation. I hope that you've liked it. Thank you so much to our funders, Pórticas, Movimento Bem Maior, Fundação Jovem Setúbal, Give for Change organization, Wellspring, and other institutions that provided us with support. I've shared in the chat a form so that people who want to be to join us in the 2025 cohort for Programa Saberes, they can enroll. Thank you so much for joining us, and we would like you to keep following our work. Thank you all so much, and see you soon.